Using that. Good morning to everybody who's watching at home, which is probably my mom, and that's it. So, hey, Mom, checking up. Why are you laughing, Adrian? Why are you laughing at me like that, man? Moms are moms, man. We love them. Alrighty, so let's just get to it. I do not want to take your time with anything that is essential, but part of everything that is not essential, but part of what we do here is we learn together, and we read about that just now. We learn together from the Word because, the system will try to tell us that we're always right. And this is why it's awesome to read the Gospels, because to the one who thinks he or she is always right, Jesus appears as a contradiction to point us to a whole different way of seeing the world and reality. And here we are studying the Gospel of Matthew together. Yes, today we go to part 2. We're still in chapter 1, by the way. We're going to read the text shortly, but let's just review some things from last week. Last week we did a little intro to the book of Matthew, and we realized a little that there was an expectation for the coming of the Messiah in Israel, that the promises to Abraham were not fulfilled yet, okay? And now appears this figure, this Jesus, who is called the Messiah, the Anointed One, the possibility that He is the one that the prophets spoke about, and through Him that the whole world would be put back together. We talked about that. We talked about how God is relentless in goodness, in kindness, in faithfulness to the covenant He established with humanity. And do we remember what covenant is all about? What is covenant? It's a promise and it's an agreement. It's a formal way to... I brought my wedding ring this week, right? So this is a covenant I made with my wife. The ring symbolizes the covenant. What? Oh, Phil is look at me at face. Phil is great. Oh, I'm sorry. I have this whole thing with the chairs at the church. I don't know why. Since the day one where Phil and I put them together, like every time I come in here, I think the teachers of the school think I'm so weird because I come in and I start like aligning the chairs again. And I see it unaligned and I'm pushing back and I realize you have your feet up. You can put your feet up. It's fine, Mary. It's good. God was relentless in the covenant. Covenant is a formal relationship in order for the world to have harmony. Adam and Eve said, no thanks. Disharmony was brought into the world, and covenant is the way God wants to put the world back together again. That's the whole deal. So while God is faithful, constantly faithful to His promises and to the covenant, the story of the entire Old Testament is humanity is not a big fan. Not wanting to play along, and then all the promises God made to Abraham can't find fulfillment, can't find reality because the human partner is not always there. So this is why now through Jesus there's the possibility that finally the covenant will work and all the promises promised to Abraham will reach the entire world. So far so good? So yes, the beginning of the story is Jesus is the son of David because he is the promised king who would rule forever. And Jesus is the son of Abraham because through him all the blessings promised by God would reach the final destination, which is the entire world. So that's what we talked about last week. And if you say, well, Tiago, Adam and Eve, what's the whole deal? There was even the word covenant doesn't appear in Genesis where they are, but look at what Hosea says. Hosea chapter 6 and 7 says, I, God, desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings, but like Adam, they transgressed the covenant. They dealt faithlessly with me. In other words, God's covenant relationship was always the ideal for the world to have harmony. And when the world had disharmony, covenant was the mean of putting it back together. And that expectation, Isaiah, was still there. People were still waiting for the Messiah to come. And this is how now Matthew will begin his gospel with a very boring list of names, right? Why begin a gospel like that? If this is the story that the entire world should know, why begin with a list of names that will put Phil to sleep in the first halfway through? That's not how you begin a genealogy, but this is what we're going to talk about today. How there's something hidden, how there are lessons hidden in this genealogy that we need to learn not only individually but as a community as well. Amen? So far so good? Are we together? Yes or no? So let's move forward together. The question is, I just phrased it now, why would Matthew begin the whole thing with a list of names? Well, the first thing we need to realize is that genealogies, list of names are all over the place in the Bible. You've seen them before, right? Book of Genesis, I told you, 11 genealogies. In those days, guess what? No Facebook, right? So you wouldn't be able to like stalk people or know who am I dating here? Who is the grandpa? We don't know. They didn't have access to that. So in the end, in a world without Facebook or phone books, knowing the genealogy of somebody is quite interesting because we sort of know there are patterns in families, right? If somebody showed up in church today and said, "Hey, my name is Joe," I said, "Oh, welcome, Joe. What's your last name?" Hitler. Suddenly you go, "Oh." And then immediately you start making connections in your head, right? It's weird. So family trees and family lines are quite important because they have something to tell us, to say about who we are and our upbringing and all these things. So while there's a fascination around the first people who appear in the genealogy, Luke, in the Gospel of Luke, it will be a whole other list of names that begin with Adam instead of Abraham here. The whole point of the genealogy is to know who is at the end of that list? Who is the person who is the descendant from Abraham and then King David? Who is this figure? And this is why Jesus comes at the end, and there's a fascination around that reality. Not only who are the elements in the family tree, but who's at the end of it. And this is what we have here. So, let's read the genealogy together. Now be prepared, guys. Very, very boring, okay? So you have to, we should even read it standing up, So that, no, I'm kidding, just sit down, it's fine. But so that we won't fall asleep in the middle of it. So just brave through this with me, okay? And in order for you to remain awake while we read, let's do a very simple exercise, okay? As we go through the names together, keep your radars up to anything that is unusual or weird or missing. And then we're engaged into what Matthew is trying to do with his genealogy. He's not just listing people who came after others. In fact, this list is completely incomplete. He's arranging the names in a way that makes sense to his audience in the message that he wants to convey. So we need to keep our radars up to know what he's doing. All right? I don't know why I did that. I don't know. Is this a radar? Should this be a radar? This? No? Okay. Let's just go. Let's just read. So, Matthew 1, verse 1, this is the record of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the anointed one, the son of David and the son of Abraham, and we talked about that. Now, verse 2. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nahshon. And Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. And Obed the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David the king. David was the father of Solomon by Bathsheba, who had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam the father of Abijah. Abijah the father of Asa. Asa was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat the father of Joram. Joram the father of Uzziah. Uzziah the father of Jotham. Jotham the father of Ahaz. And Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh. Manasseh, who by the way, horrible guy. Let's continue reading. Was the father of Amon, and Amon the father of Josiah. Josiah became the father of Jeconiah and his brothers, and at the time of deportation to Babylon. After the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the father of Abihud, and Abihud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor. Azor was the father of Zadok. Zadok the father of Akim, and Akim the father of Eliud. Eliud was the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born, who is called, again, the Messiah. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. It was a joy being with you guys tonight. Or, see you next week, guys. Whew. No, I'm kidding. We'll go back. Man, that was long, wasn't it? Isn't that weird? So tell me, what do you think was weird in this line of names? What did you pick up that was different? I already gave you a hint up at the board. When you compare the genealogy of Matthew to one like in Genesis, the guys who are with me Tuesday nights know that what the genealogies look like in Genesis, right? It's very weird. There's the name of a person. This person lived, X many years. He became the father of this person, and then the father lived this many years. And then they had other sons and daughters, so all the days of whatever person was this, and then they died. Period. And then it just moves on to the next person. So just with this, we can already pick up, some interesting hints as to the genealogy of Jesus, where you don't have necessarily like this is the father of this one was the father of this. It's just like an ancestor. This person was the ancestor of this person. You can trace this person to this other person. So we have Abraham, we have Isaac, we have Jacob, we have Judah, and then the text stops to tell us about Tamar. Now, why is this weird? Tell me. Well, number one, you might say, well, there are no women in the genealogy of Genesis. But, when you go to Chronicles, for instance, a lot of genealogies there, you'll find women in the genealogy there. So you say, okay, there are genealogies with women. There are some without women. That's fine. The point is, do you remember that Abraham was married to who? To Sarah. And then Isaac was married to who? Rebecca. Good. This is a good quiz, right? And then Jacob was married to who? And then a bunch of people, right, Rob? Guy was restless. He worked all those years for Rachel, but then, and this is a fascinating story, which we'll get to Tuesday night, but can I give you just a glimpse, right? Remember who Jacob was, right? He was all about fooling people and tricking people into be somebody else, right? He comes to his dad and says, who is this? And he says, Dad, I'm Esau, your son. It was Jacob all along. Then guess what? Years go by, he shows up there, he falls in love, he says, I want her. And then guess what his father-in-law is going to do? Same thing, he's going to trick him. So it's awesome because the story is full of mirrors. All the things that Jacob do will happen to him later, but this is just for our Tuesday night crowd. This goodness. All right, so all these guys had wives, but the first woman to be mentioned is who? So do you see that something weird is going on here? So the problem is not that there are women or there are not women or that the list is different. What is going on here is that the list is quite selective. There's something happening here that we need to put our finger on. Yes, Rob? It's not his wife. In fact, Tamar is not even Judah's wife, so it's very good. I'll mention her in a second. So I just want you to realize that there are genealogies in the Bible, and when we come to the Jesuses, there's this weird mixture of names, and it ends with 14 generations from Abraham to David, then David to Babylon, 14, then Babylon afterwards, 14 to the Messiah. And then you're like, what is going on here? There's something up, something quite weird. And obviously, one of the first things I want to mention to you is that when the genealogy stops to tell us that this Jesus who is being born is related to David, do you see how the text said, the king? We need to pause just for a second and think, because it's very easy to discuss the Bible here in the 21st century where we have our phones and stuff. But just think about this, okay? Before Jesus showed up, during those days where, Israel was, all over the place, most of the kings for hundreds of years were not from the Davidic line. In other words, they were just people who were governing. Herod the king was not somebody who was of royal blood. He was just like a ruthless, soldier who made it. There's a whole history there. So a lot of people, a lot of Jews at the time from Israel could say, no, we are all related or affiliated to Abraham. It was easy to say that. Not a lot of people, though, could say that they're related to King David and that they have royal blood. And in a culture where Rome has a very heavy hand and a very tight ship, for you to go around just saying, hey, you know who I'm related to? The real king of Israel. So in other words, when Matthew is writing about this, the first thing that we need to realize is that this list here could be seen as the threat. It's a very outspoken, revolutionary list because he's tracing the whole lineage of Jesus and saying, by the way, this man who walked here in the midst of all of you, he's related to King David. He's the true ruler. And we know how that's going to play out later in the book of Matthew, right? When Herod hears there's a new king going around, he starts killing a bunch of children. So not a good thing to put in a list, but here it is. Matthew is saying that this Jesus is a very real and important threat to this whole Roman deal that's going on right now, and we're not afraid of talking about it. So that's the number one cool thing that we have in the genealogy of Jesus. The whole thing is like a political resistance to the order of Rome, to the established order. So far, so good? Are we together? Yes or no? Okay, let's move forward. Good. That's number one thing I wanted to say. Now it ends, obviously, with another threat to the Roman Empire. Just because Matthew is saying that there were 14 generations, then 14 generations, then 14 generations, and then Jesus. What does this mean? In 14, to make up 14, you have how many sevens? This is really a sequence of 7. So you have 7, 7 here, 7, 7 here, 7, 7 here, meaning 6 sevens. Now the new group of 14 would be the 7th group of 7th, and the first name in that in Jesus. So what Matthew is trying to share is all the expectation. The entire human history is converging. It's finding a Sabbath. It's finding a Jubilee now in this man. And the prophecies of Daniel will help us, by the way, in Daniel 9 and everything else, pointing to the 490 weeks. Time has come. Jubilee is here. Sabbath is here. Jesus is the one where the entire history will converge into. So can you think about this? These guys reading this and saying, who does this guy think he is? This list is a threat in and of itself. There's a new king in town, Max, and his name is Jesus. That's it. Amazing. This is just, have you guys ever seen this before? Yes or no? Yes or no? No, good. So we're learning something together. Yes, good. Well, I'm not even into the thing I want to say. That was just like the appetizer. Now we're going to get into the meal. Are you ready? Good. Number 2 we see in this list. Abraham, was he Israelite or non-Israelite? A Gentile. Isaac, Gentile or Israelite? It was like a mix, right? Let's say G, because Israel starts when? With Jacob, right? Here we have Israel. Was Judah an Israelite? Yes. Tamar? Oh, nope. Canaanite. And now we're going to see a bunch of other people in this list who are Moabites, who are Hittites. In fact, these are the very people who part of the Old Testament tells Israel, don't mix with those guys, okay? They're not great. They're going to do harm to you. Not good. And then, here they are. In the whole list of the genealogy of Jesus. So one of the most fascinating things, and to me this is the most important thing, which I'll go back to in the end, is that the genealogy of Jesus, Audie, has a mixture of people from all over the place. People from where, I said? All over the place. Okay? Not just one place. All over the place. There's a mixture, Max, in the genealogy of Jesus, and this is very important. Jesus is at the end of the list, and that means he has inherited all of this mixture of nations, of pasts, of backgrounds. They're all in his family tree. So far, so good, yes or no? Now let's get to something interesting. I mentioned earlier that while Sarah could have been mentioned, Rebecca, Rachel, none of these Israelite matriarchs are mentioned, but the first woman who's mentioned is a Canaanite called Tamar. Now this is very interesting because the text deliberately stops and tells us Judah, by the way, had these kids by Tamar. In other words, when we're reading, if we're reading responsively, Phil, and not just waiting for the pastor to preach a sermon at you, if we pause and say, because remember guys, and I tell this Tuesday night all the time, one day Pastor Tiago will not be around, and my whole job here is not to preach at you, is to teach the Bible to you so that whenever I'm not around, guess what? You can read the Bible for yourself. Do you guys get that? I'm just revealing the plan. That's the plan. I want you to be able to read the Bible for yourself. So when something like this shows up in the text, you have to pause and say, why is it mentioning her and not others? So the text is pushing us to remember who Tamar was, sis. And do we remember who Tamar was? Very short story. Judah was one of the kids who did not care about God, his dad, or anybody else. He wanted to do his own thing while everybody was marrying Israelite, the people from the family, not Israel yet, but people from the family. Judah said, I'm going to hang out over there in that other corner with the Canaanites. He married a Canaanite, had several sons. The first one was called And he's the one who married Tamar. Right? Married Tamar. The Genesis text tells us that he was a horrible person. I don't know what he did. And then the text just tells us that God killed him. Then we say, see, Tiago, this is why the Bible is not very popular in our days. Or just wait. Because then the wife, Tamar, goes to the younger son because of financial inheritance, social status, a bunch of things I'm not going to go into now, but I will Tuesdays. Tamar goes to the next son, called Onan. He was even worse than the first kid. In fact, his responsibility was to give Tamar children so that she would receive the inheritance from the first older brother. So far, so good. Are you with me? But the text tells us, and I'm just going to say it out loud with the kids in here and everything, that Onan had sexual relations with Tamar, and right before the moment where, they conceive, he would step back and the semen would fall on the floor. The Bible is very, explicit. We think it's like a story for, no, it's very real. Now, that information is there for a reason. He pushed back and he did not impregnate her. Why? I mean, if he didn't want to give her children, that's one thing. He would just not sleep with her, right? He said, no, I'm not interested in giving you anything. I'm just going to do my thing. You stay in your tent. But no, he's using her body for what? For his pleasure. And not giving her what was owed her. In other words, Onan was using the body of Tamar as what? As a prostitute. I just want you for my benefit, period. Now, obviously, guess what? God killed him too. And then we say, hey, Tiago, once again, this is why people don't read the Bible. This is the violent God. And isn't it nice these days to criticize God, in an air-conditioned room? Nice view. People are very quick to blame God for a bunch of things, but we're never in the place of the oppressed, are we? Think about Tamar being raped constantly. Do you think for her it was just and just, or an act of mercy from God? Do we know that? Now, just keep all those things in mind when we read about the God of Scripture. It's much more tricky and complicated than we think, because we always read the Bible within our context, but not perceiving what's going on through the eyes of the oppressed. Now, I could just stop and talk all about this in our political, social culture in the West these days, about how important it is to look at the world and life through the eyes of those who are oppressed in our midst, but I'm not. Let's just move forward. I'll just leave that there, okay? Now, God killed the guy, and now Tamar needs to go to the youngest son, but Judah's like, because we know that God killed both sons, but Judah doesn't know, so everybody thinks that this woman is like a ninja. We don't know what this woman is doing. She's killing all my children. I'm just going to hold off on the younger one. So Tamar, whenever he grows, I'll bring him to you. It's going to be fine. Well, years go by. Abraham does not bring the older son. Tamar is once again feeling the injustice that has been done to her. So she comes up with a plan. Now, obviously, we wouldn't come up with the same plan because we're so holy, right? We're so holy. But this is her plan. I'm going to go up to the town, Entranceville. And it's not that she pretended to be a prostitute, because at the time there were a lot of women that stood around the entrance of town. If you wanted somebody to have your child or to raise your child, you could find a woman there. Women were there for different chores and also for promiscuity. So she stand there with a veil so that nobody will recognize her. Judah comes by, kind of tipsy because it was like a harvest festival. You know how those get. You don't, because I don't know. But, I just try to speak, in ancient Judean for one. Comes back a little tipsy, sees a nice lady, says, hey, how are we going to do this? And give me your credentials, which is like your staff and your ring, and we'll make it happen. So it happens. He sleeps with Tamar, his daughter-in-law, without knowing. Goes back home. All is good. He's relieved. Everything went well. Months later, Tamar appears pregnant. And then as a good religious man, Judah goes up to her and says, somebody stone her and kill her right now, right? Because when we sweep stuff under the rug, Adrian, religious people, as we are, when we start living in hypocrisy, we tend to get very legalistic, you see. Because we know we're hiding stuff, and it feels great when we see the others suffering as well. Because then we feel like we can manage hiding whatever we're going through by piety and righteousness and exceeding, devotion to God. So Judah just says, stone her. And it's like, no, just a second. It's your kid. And suddenly Judah comes to the sense and says, you are more righteous than I am. Now, I could easily go the regular pastor way and say, so guys, if you have received injustice, please pretend you're a prostitute. And then that would be like the application, right? No, it's not the application. The application is that biblical story in life is more complicated than we think. And why is this a relief to me, guys? Because is our life very simple? It's not, is it? It's complicated. And then guess what? God is working within all of that. So when we stop at the genealogy to remind us about the story of Tamar, we need to know that all of this is included in the genealogy of Jesus. He's not afraid to show it. That's part of who He is, part of His family. Now I could go down the list, right? So threat, I talked about the mix between Gentiles and then the choices. I forgot to write over here. Mix of Gentiles and Israel. Choice is made. We have the story of Tamar. We know who Rahab was. Yes or no? So Tamar, a Canaanite. Rahab was a Canaanite as well. Remember when Joshua and the guys were conquering the new world, crossing the river Jordan, when they say, well, let's send in some spies into Jericho. And they sent 2 spies, Adrian. Now you guys will see how this story is pretty fascinating when you read it as is, Phil. That's how it goes. Let's pretend I'm a spy, okay? It's like, where are we going to go? And then the first thing they see is like a lady, like outside, right? It's like, well, maybe we should go over there. We should spy that place over there, which was like place where you shouldn't go, because they're. Well, Tamar sort of pretended to be, Rahab was a prostitute. She's not pretending. She was. So without the first places where the spies find, well, maybe we should spy in there first, and that's where they go. Well, the good thing is that Rahab was a lady that even without knowing God, she understood that there is a God, and that this God is a good God, and He has been doing amazing things. And you guys remember the story, right? She protects the men, she is saved, and then she is ingrained into Israel, being a Canaanite, because the very point Paul will make later, that not all Israelites are from Israel, because Israel is not just bloodline, it's a way to live. That was already anticipated back there. Rahab, a faithful Israelite, even without being part of Israel at first, she becomes part of the family. So here we are. Tamar pretending to do all these crazy things, part of the family. Rahab, prostitute, part of the family. So when you're reading this story, you're like, well, I'm not doing very well in my life, but at least, I'm not, like, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? At least, and this is not to say, because this is the most Pharisaic thing ever, right? Oh, I'm doing so well. At least I'm not like that other publican or something like that. That's our regular tendency to think like that. But the point here I want to make is, are you realizing who is in this family tree and these names that are being mentioned? So compare that to your life. And the point is not for you to feel more righteous. The point is for you to feel relieved. Like, oh, maybe there's room for me in there as well. That's the point. Now, if you continue down the list, you know the story of Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite, part of the family. And then the text stopped to tell us that Bathsheba, and then it says, the wife of Uriah, the Hittite, another nation. And when the text stops to tell, couldn't the text just say, and David was, had Solomon with Bathsheba, and then the author would say, move forward quick, stop writing, Matthew, just move forward. No, he says, by the way, this Bathsheba, wife of Uriah. And the text is mentioning it so that we can stop and go see what it means. Because we know the story, not everybody did, and when you go back, and we know the story of Uriah and David, yes? Yes or no? Let me refresh your memory. All right? You know the story. Then for you. Remind me your name again. Mario. Here it comes. David is the king, right? Cool. Story begins like this. In the days when the kings went into battle, and we know that David is a warrior, right? Yeah, great. This is 2 Samuel. He already killed Goliath. He's already very famous for being like an amazing, skilled fighter. He kills giants. It's amazing. Yeah. So, in the days when kings go to battle, and then you expect, well, David is going to go out and kill. The text says, David stayed behind in his couch. And you're like, uh-oh, this is not good. What's going on? And then it says that David rose from his couch. Sunday afternoon, NFL game, you stand from your couch. And he starts walking around the palace, Adrian. Now, once you go to Israel, you'll realize that the city of David is in a higher position. Houses of people were in the bottom. And then you say, well, Bathsheba was very tricky because there's this lady that came out and started bathing in the roof of her house, Mario. So there's some, well, by the way, Women always bathed at the top of the house. It's at the end of the day, and it was the custom at the top of the house because nobody could see what happened in the top of the house. There was no Santa Fe doesn't have any buildings, but like regular cities, right, where you have buildings and stuff. Basically, nobody could see anything except if you were the king and you lived up there. So Bathsheba was doing her thing. She was bathing herself, but the king was just walking around. He knows what time of the day it is. So he has like that channel, He's the exclusive only person who has the channel, Mario. And he goes up and let's see what's going on. Like, look at that. And he says, hey, who's that? Because he rules the whole thing, right? Soldier comes in and says, oh, king. This is Bathsheba, the wife of your soldier Uriah, the Hittite. Great warrior, by the way. Great friend, loyal to the king. King goes, yeah, I see. Can you pick her up for me, please? I need to speak with her urgently. So this story, we can get to it in very much detail, but I'm just framing it as it is written. And basically what happens between David and Bathsheba is not a beautiful romantic love story. It's pretty much power rape. David picks her up. He knows who she is, who she's, together with, and still makes the whole thing happen. She's very passive. And all the words mentioned in that story tie to other circumstances in the Bible to rape. So it's a horrible story. A very horrible story. And when the text pauses to tell, hey, this is the wife of Uriah, we're supposed to stop and know the story. Because after David finishes whatever he does with Bathsheba, he sends her away. She realizes she's pregnant, sends a message to the king, tell the king I'm pregnant. He realizes the catastrophe. And then next step, obviously, when you're a man very righteous and good, what do? You call the husband to tell him the truth. Nope. To convince him to drink a lot. Hey, Uriah, you're back from war. Drink a little bit. Let's get married and then go home and sleep with your wife. Because that's plan A. Plan A is, let me see if Uriah will sleep with Bathsheba and then he'll think the son is his. Brilliant, right? But, and here comes the great thing about alcohol in the Bible, is that while Noah drinks and does a lot of nakedness, dancing in the tent, Uriah remains faithful even drunk. Because in the Bible, in the narrative, alcohol has always this function of revealing the true self of what's inside there. And even while being drunk, Uriah is faithful. He said, I will not go. While my brothers are fighting in the battle, I will not go and sleep with my wife. I will stay right here at the door. So he does not sleep with the wife. David goes to plan B, which is, I'll just kill the guy. He sends him back with a letter, put him in the front of the army, and then that's it. He's killed. So hear this story. After, half an hour, you realize that David is both one who instigates others to do horrible things. He is sort of in a rapist position of taking possession of a woman that's not his knowingly, forcefully. And number 3, he kills a guy. And all this comes from a little stop saying, oh, by the way, this is the wife of Uriah. Are you guys with me so far? Yes or no? Are you realizing what is there? In other words, this list is not there for us triumphantly to say, yay, time has come. This list is for us to realize, wow, how is it possible that God or Jesus, or when Matthew is revealing all these things, he's not afraid of citing all these things? There's a reason why they're not afraid of citing all these things. Now for me to bring this down, because it's time for us to eat together. Amen? Amen. Let me just tell you a story to wrap at least one of the 2 lessons I want to leave with you after going through a little of the history of the Old Testament. When I was younger in high school, I was not the greatest person, Adrian. I was bored a lot. So in other words, in a time where there's not a lot of internet and you're bored, you end up just doing stuff just to make people mad and because you're bored. That's what I did. Not a great person. And my family heard about it over the phone because there's no internet or anything. People called and say, hey, your son here is doing a lot of, he's banging on doors. He's, working with people to explode bombs in the dormitory. It's just a bad situation. So one of my aunts came to visit me knowing about all this. And then when she saw me at the cafeteria, she took me by the arm. After she spent, I think, half an hour with the dean, and then she came to the cafeteria, saw me for the first time, took me by the arm, put me by a wall, finger to the face, and said, "You are an embarrassment to this family." I remember that. You know, when you swallow really hard, like a rock is going through? In other words, if my aunt went back home, right? And they said, "Hey, I heard you went to visit," because her son was my roommate, so we're cousins, we're together. Her son was the most wonderful human being ever. Righteous, lovely, great. "So how's your son?" You know, it's, "Oh, he's doing great. He's getting good grades. All is good." Also, "How is Tiago, your nephew? I heard he's there." Shoot, how would you respond? "Oh, so well, it's going to rain today, I think," right? You change the subject. Are you guys with me? Yes or no? Right? We gloss over, right? I mean, just think of your own family tree. Think of your life. Can't we? I mean, do we gloss over a few individuals here and there because it sort of gets weird? Or maybe you're the person people gloss over. Maybe you're that bad apple in there. Well, let me tell you, I know exactly what that feeling is. But what we have in this list, and I use this story so you'll know, is that God is not glossing over anybody. He says, "I want you to understand what this family tree looks like, and I want you to understand that if this is the family of Jesus, if there's room for all these people there, then guess what? There's room for anybody in there." That's the point. So when we come to the gospel, this is one of the first truths that slap us in the face. Anu, in the family, in the body of Jesus, there is room for every single person. So I know we do stuff in the week that we're not proud of, Mario. Is that true? We're not proud of things we do sometimes. And what normally happens in religion is if you do something stupid during the week, you won't come to Tuesday night, whatever Bible study, because you don't want to face anybody. You won't come to church because you do not want to face anybody. But what this does to all this dynamic is, no, when you're not proud of yourself during the week, well, just be reminded that there is room for you as well. This is what the family looks like. This is how grace works. Because each of these individuals in the past were able to find grace in redemption, in mercy from God. And as long as we are together, we can encourage one another. If we remain alone, then what can we do for each other? How will we be built up? How will we face another day? So if you're not proud of something you did this week, last week, this new year, if you already abandoned all of your resolutions, there's room for you here. There's room for you in the family of Jesus. Isn't that beautiful? I think that's a beautiful way to begin a gospel. And this is why Matthew begins with this list, to remind us of these things. Which leads me to my next and final point. What we have in Matthew is what we have in a lot of books and literature. In this genealogy, Audie, we have an announcement of plot. In other words, what is introduced here is what we'll see throughout the entire book, all the way to the end. And you say, "Tiago, what are you talking about? We're not going to see all these names again." This is what I mean. Everything that will happen later, Jesus, the son of David, Abraham, and how in the end of the book, Jesus' body, the church, will also include people from other nations and backgrounds. All of this is anticipated here. In fact, one of the last things Jesus tells the disciples is, in Matthew 28, "Go and make disciples" from where? All nations. And where was this introduced? Right here. All nations. Everybody together. So in the body, in the genealogy of Jesus, we already have a direction as to what's going to happen in the future. The body, the church, what will later be the church, must also be a community that has people from all over the place. It must be a community that is multifaceted, different, that does not necessarily dress alike or think alike or vote alike or eat alike, because this is what the family looks like. It's different. So we should read the story and look around. And this is why I'm proud of looking around at our church. Does our church resemble this divine ideal for His family? With variety, sin, embarrassment, blessing, all nations. Do we look like? I think we look a little bit like that these days, right? We dress differently, we are different, we eat different, we're different people. But here we are together. And that's the mystery of what a church community is. Because the one thing that brings us together is Jesus. And we can live in freedom under that umbrella of grace and goodness. Amen. Now we must avoid the temptation of thinking that the church is made of people who look exactly the same way, behave the same way, because that's more of what we saw earlier with Nebuchadnezzar, isn't it? Did we not just read Daniel 3? Golden statue, you will listen to the music, you will worship, you will do this, you will do that. It's forced, it's implemented, and then we're stuck in between a rock and a hard place without knowing what to do. Not so with God. There's freedom. And you can come to the table. The funny thing is that the world of Nebuchadnezzar, of Babel, is still around us in the modern day. Be the same, think the same, behave the same. The modern world will push us to do the very same thing. To sit, meet, approach only those who are similar to us. So we must realize how revolutionary this genealogy is. That this variety is God's dream for the body of Christ. Multifaceted, people from all backgrounds and pasts finding meaning to life together in what Jesus accomplished. So right now we're going to sit down and we're going to eat together. So as we sit and eat, may you realize that this was the goal all along. For all of us to be together in Him. Eating, learning, giving thanks, and serving others. So friends, if the gospel of Jesus begins with this, shouldn't we begin the year thinking the same thing? That our community must be inclusive, open, embracing every single person, whatever nation, background, past, so that there is one table for all, with food for everybody. And that's the dream of God for His Messiah in Jesus and for His church later as the body of Christ. What do you guys think? Amen, right? Are we encouraged? Yes or no? Then that's good. That's it. Now we're going to eat. And eating is a foundational part of what we do together because we're going to do just that which God dreamed of. Us sitting together and meeting together under the grace and unified in Jesus.